Chapter 1. Rain. I have to get out. They are near and I have no time. Murderers. There, the door, tantalizingly close and invitingly ajar. If I open it, everything I know will be lost. Kalan, Raz, everything. But Raz is already gone, and Kalan comes to kill me. So, why do I hesitate? Who is on the other side of that door? My name is Vale Kaitur, the Butcher of Kalan. I ran as fast and as far as I could that night, moving no slower than a jog until after the sun came up. In the days that followed, I just tried to stay alive and stay hidden from the vengeful forces sure to be hunting me. I hid in ditches, lay down to snatch fitful sleep in fields of cattle, and, when I was lucky enough to come across them, curled up in unused buildings on the patchwork farmlands of the plains to escape the harsh and worsening cold of late autumn. The nightmares that had fatigued me since the death of my beloved continued to ensure I never once found sufficient rest. After more than 2 weeks of virtually sleepless flight, I at last crossed into the mountainous realm of Shoba. I had figured, or at least hoped, that this cold empire, with its scattered villages, fortified towns, and, importantly, very poor diplomatic relations with Mabal, would offer me some measure of shelter in anonymity. So it was that I gratefully transitioned from fields and ditches to walking the steep, rain-sodden roads amidst the spiraling peaks. The air had a fresh bite to it in the mountains, a sting in the chest and throat that I had not felt so keenly before in my life. It left me drawing ragged, uneven breaths long before I would otherwise have tired. The weather was also becoming increasingly inhospitable. The rain seemed unending, and not the lazy fat droplets that enriched the plains. No, the mountain rain came at me like daggers, ice-cold and driven in unpredictable squalls. My traveling clothes were proving woefully inadequate. I resolved to take whatever shelter I came across, though I fervently hoped for the kind that came with hot food, a lit fire, and a warm bed. Twilight had fallen on the rocky world around me when, now some miles from the border, I spied a tavern through the sheets of falling water. The dark wood and stone building was 3 stories tall, and had flickering lights glowing through most of its windows. So worn was I from my flight and the relentless weather that once I saw that sanctuary, my mind could perceive little else. My whole world narrowed to a dim tunnel of vision, and no sensation reached me but that which was made by the falling rain and the lighted windows of my salvation. The inside was blissfully, wondrously warm and dry. The smell of cooking meat and bread almost brought me to tears. I communicated my desire for a room to the kindly person who greeted me in the entryway. Seaborn being the primary language of both Shoba and Mabal was a significant factor in my decision to flee there. They took my coins, thankfully unconcerned by, or oblivious to, their origin in the royal mint at Mabal, and I was led to the lone room on the top floor. The bed, so attractive a prospect it practically glowed, had been made before my arrival. The attendant kindled the small fire, lit a handful of candles which cast leaping, dancing shadows across the walls, and then hurried away, promising a swift return. I scarcely had time to remove my sodden traveller's cloak and deposit my pack before they bustled back into the cramped room to lay a loaf of bread, some cheese, and a small cut of cooked meat on the reading table. Finally, along with this bountiful meal, the tavern worker placed some spare drying linen at the foot of my bed, bowed respectfully, smiled sweetly, and left, closing the door behind them. I had just enough energy to undress by the fire, drape my clothes over the foot of the bed as best I could to help them dry, decide the food would wait till morning, snuff out the candles, and collapse, whole bodily into the warm embrace of the blankets. I rapidly fell into my first proper sleep in weeks, cradled by the sound of the crackling fire and the wind and rain lashing the windows from outside. Unfortunately, even there in Schober, the nightmares had followed me. I was coming to fear these dreams would never leave me. The rain had eased somewhat come morning, and now a cold, grey light intruded through the single small window. Feeling more energetic, not to mention more dry, than I had in a long time, I quickly rose and dressed. I was relieved to discover that my clothes had dried out quite well overnight. There are few things more demoralizing than waking up dry, only to ruin it all by having to redress in cold, damp clothes. Not quite ready to face the world altogether, I busied myself relighting the fire with the small pile of wood and tinder set aside in a basket. That task completed, and with some of the edge taken off the morning chill in the room, I placed myself on the thin chair at the reading table and set about relieving the table of the burden of last night's dinner. With nothing for my mind to focus on except the steady process of chewing crusty bread and cold meat, my thoughts began to wander back to the shadowy places. The heavy, relentless weight of reality began to press down on me in a way that did not feel remotely metaphorical. It felt real, like a force applied to every inch of my body. I swear I could feel that force, made up of loss, hurt, confusion, and anger, pulling persistently down on my skin, drawing the flesh of my face tighter across my cheekbones, and making my limbs just that little bit heavier. I had staved off these thoughts ever since fleeing the college. That visceral, burning rage had been the last time I acknowledged my emotions. I allowed myself to sink back into the shadows. I allowed myself to feel. Simple sadness came first. Sadness is cold. I could no longer feel the flickering warmth of the fire on my back. I had lost Raz, the love of my life. Their death played out again in my mind with sickening clarity. I was not able to stop those images from resurfacing that morning, and I would never be able to stop them rising unbidden until the day I died. I began to cry, staring directly ahead, mouth hanging half open, chunk of bread in my hand. Silent and still but for my sorry, undeserving breaths and the tears streaming down my face. Next came self-loathing. Self-loathing is bitter. It stung the back of my throat and pressed a thorn into my forehead. Raz is dead, and what did I do about it? I watched. I watched as they tore apart and left my life forever. Then what? Then I moped. I felt sorry for myself. Oh, woe is me. My partner is dead. Like somehow it was me that was the victim, not Raz. Pathetic. Self-loathing drove me into a reckless state. As I bit into my cheek and pressed my fingernails into the flesh of my palms, I felt the striking respond. It began to twist and turn about my fingers and graze against the skin of my face, unbidden and unguided. My bitterness manifested in magic. How could the world take Raz from me? I had to understand what had killed Rasan. No, not what. Demon had been certain of that. In their feverish insistence that night, they had set my quaking mind alight, and a new resolution took form in the smoke. Who had killed my sweet, beautiful Rasan? It had something to do with that kaleidoscopic flame, Demon had said. Other magic, they called it. They had practically screamed it at me. Anger. Comforting, wholesome fury came with my memories of Demon's words. Anger is warm. It enveloped me, driving away the cold and the bitterness. An intimately familiar blanket of rage descended upon me as I sat at the reading table, and again the striking responded. As heat flushed my cheeks, so too did the swirling current of magic begin to build, passing around me and pressing hard against my body in a great and building torrent. The tears dried on my face, my teeth ground together, and the bread in my hand fell to the table as crumbs escaped my tightly clenched fist. The anger also slowly brought focus. After some moments it delivered me back to the then and there. I inhaled deeply, drawing in hot, stifled air, and raised my hands in front of my chest. In accordance with my training, I then exhaled at length, allowing the sensation of calm to trickle along my arms to the tips of my fingers, which I moved in careful order. My palms drove slowly downward in front of my chest, suppressing the striking and quieting the tempest. From anger, some clarity. My objective need not change. I would find out what had happened to Rasan. I would find out how it was that a prodigy of the striking could die like an amateur in front of a cheering crowd. I would discover the how, and then I would discover the who. I inhaled and exhaled steadily, relaxing my tightly wound muscles one after another. There were places in this world where I might seek this knowledge, places and people I had heard of in my training. All of those goals were temporarily out of reach, but my road to them all started in exactly the same way. Allowing myself a satisfied smile, I rose from the chair and strode out the door. "Good morning." This was the attendant I had met in the doorway last night. They were smiling pleasantly at me over a tray of food they were delivering to a table of seated guests. The room on the ground floor of the tavern was quite spacious, some 20 feet or more along the stained wooden walls, with one corridor dominated by a large, sturdy serving counter. Tables of a variety of sizes were scattered about the open space, with enough chairs to seat far more than the half a dozen or so currently enjoying their breakfast. "Some breakfast, friend?" Now that I had descended the final steps into the dining area, I could see the attendant was slightly taller than me. This, along with their hard jaw and broad, square shoulders, made them quite the figure. "Tora," I offered. The people of Shoba had no reason to know who Vale Kaitur was, but the memories of Frotrude, blood-drenched and utterly still on the corridor floor, and of Rune staring at me in breathless horror, were still firmly on the forefront of my mind. Best not to be Vale Kaitur for a while. Perhaps forever. I returned the tavern worker's smile. "Tora Sten. I have eaten, thank you." "Name's Lear," replied Lear, inclining their head respectfully. "This here's my tavern. If you need anything during daylight, I'll be somewhere hereabouts, or likely outside near the barn. At night, I sleep in the room behind the counter." With that, Lear took their now empty tray and headed over to the aforementioned counter. I had only left Kalan on the rarest of occasions, and I had certainly never travelled beyond the borders of the Empire of Mabal. If I was to find my way around the mountains of Shoba, I would need help. I followed Lear. "Do you know how I might get to Rana?" "The capital?" Lear gave a snort. "Not likely. It's near winter time. Roads will be closed to most, except essential travellers." I felt myself deflate. A dead end so soon. They must have noticed my crestfallen expression. "What do you want to get to Rana so badly for?" Lear looked me up and down carefully. "You need healing? 'Cause if you're sick, I'll not have you running around here infecting all my patrons." Healing. The caravan of thought in my brain was forced to change direction so suddenly by this that I would be surprised if Lear did not hear an audible crash. I took several painful seconds to work out that they most likely meant the granite baths, quasi-famous healing waters of Rana, a bunch of old non-scientific hokum. The concern on Lear's face grew noticeably over the course of my mind's frantic rehitching of the horses of reasoning to the carts of cogitation. Lear leant back slightly. No, no healing needed. Actually, I would quite like to visit the library. Right you are, then. They looked me up and down one more time, as if to make sure I was not about to drop dead or start sprouting hideous, contagious boils without warning. Well, as I said, roads are likely all closed. Best person to ask would be Jarl in any case. Jarl? Aye, Jarl Steppersland, Sergeant of the Guards up in Motu village. They keep an eye on all the wagons moving through these parts. If anyone, Jarl will know when and how you can get to Rana. Motu's just up the way to the south, less than an hour's walk. Lear turned away to tend to a tray of tankards. Thank you kindly, I replied. Lear anticipated my next question, answering with their back turned. Room's yours long as you're paying, they said, matter-of-factly. They turned to make meaningful eye contact. And long as you're behaving civil. Thank you, I repeated. I will do my utmost. I meant it, too. Not only did I want a roof over my head, but this tavern was also welcoming, warm, cheap, and, best of all, did not require great explanation regarding who I was or where I was from. I was under no illusions as to the degree of luck that had carried me to such a place. I stepped through the narrow entranceway and out the oaken front door. Before me lay the rock-strewn road I had left the night before. The drizzle was so light now as to almost be pleasant, and the grey haze of the day very nearly contained a hint of warmth. The road south to Motu was uphill, but not unpleasantly so. It followed a winding valley, flanked by those ever-present towering peaks. The clearly well-travelled track traversed alongside a small stream. It had been laid on the elevated, relatively flat ground of what must have once been a floodplain or terrace long ago, perhaps when the waterway held the more impressive title of Big Stream. Riverstones of varying sizes had been placed on the track in an attempt to prevent it from turning entirely to muck, with varying degrees of success. On the side of the stream where I walked, the west side, was at least one further sharp rise to a grassy, scrub-laden terrace some 15 feet further above my head. The effect was to create a sort of zigzag up from the stream made by the two terraces, over which loomed the imposing valley wall. This mighty talus slope was mirrored on the far shore to form the remarkably uniform V-shape that was the valley. After about an hour, just as Lear had suggested, I found myself rounding a gentle curve in the road, passing some large, smooth boulders. There I met the sturdy wooden walls of the village of Motu. Motu was situated on a flat, open section of ground, where the stream I had been following diverged from a much larger river. The flat ground was on one of the more elevated terraces, making the final stretch of the track noticeably more uphill. The whole village sat in the center of the V-shape made by the intersection of the stream and the river. I passed through the open gates unchallenged. Clearly, whatever the walls were intended for, it was not to keep wandering travelers at bay. Motu, it quickly became apparent, was a busy village. Smoke rose from almost every chimney in sight, curling skywards from the largely uniform wooden houses. As I crossed the threshold at the gate, I had to step swiftly aside to avoid being crushed then and there by an enormous, leathery, hairy pack beast of some sort, dragging a cart full of lumber. The animal was half the size again of the largest horse I had ever seen, and hauled itself along by its two muscular forelegs and shortened hind legs. The cart was driven out of the gates by an enthusiastic rider, clutching reins and a whip, goading the strange creature on with shrill whistled notes. To either side of me, once the beast and its burden had passed, was a ring road surrounding the village. Separating the outermost buildings from the circular wooden palisade was perhaps 20 feet of muddy ground. This road was cobbled similarly to the track by the stream, but the rains had taken a much greater toll in these closer confines, and footing was precarious. The same could be said of the large, straight road between the houses ahead of me, leading to what I assumed was the village centre. Suddenly, this little mountain village loomed large all around me. The narrow houses with their steep, sharp roofs seemed to lean over me, mocking my efforts at self-determination. It was a fine thing to have marched all the way up to Motu with grand plans about the future, demanding passage to far-off places I had only dimly heard of, to conduct research, the goals of which might be generously labelled ambitious. It would be entirely another to put all of that into action. I was becoming increasingly mindful of the fact, as I made my way towards the village centre, that I had never technically been responsible for my own well-being before. I had never had occasion to be. Kallang College had always provided for all of my needs, ensured by the hefty donations my family had made following my effective banishment there as a child. With the cold and now increasingly persistent drizzle beginning to once again soak through my travelling layers, and many certainties about the future seeming to darken deeper into obscurity, I felt a small, guilty pang of longing for the comforts of my old college. The warm corridors, the ready supply of food and drink, the monthly stipend, which had seemed so needless at the time, but the leftovers of which were the only thing keeping me housed and fed now. Even the lectures and exams had had a reassuring constancy about them. I daydreamed momentarily, as I had in months and years gone by, of graduating as a full-fledged striker. I would don the ceremonial robes of the laureate and begin my noble journey in the Iron Legions, perhaps to fame, and who knows what else. The future had been so well prescribed for me, step by intricate step. I missed that firm surety. I missed Raz. I stopped and shook myself down, warding off the damp and wishful thinking both. Raz was gone, as was that future. Any hopes of regaining even a semblance of my old life were pure nonsense. Nothing could be done to bring back any of it. I took a deliberate breath, in and out, then shook myself once more before reassessing my surroundings. I was now standing on the edge of a modest open space at the end of the road. This was indeed a busy place. Several carts moved to and fro across the central area, each drawn by one of the same large creatures I had encountered at the gate. With more time and a decent vantage point, I was able to get a better view of the beasts. They walked on all four of their limbs, but what I had first assumed must have all been legs turned out to be only half so. The hind limbs were cloven-hoofed affairs, large, muscular, and covered in thick grey hairs, just like the rest of the body, but the forelimbs were much more like human arms on closer inspection, complete with a grasping hand at the end of each. The head was similar to that of a common dog with a less pronounced snout. The body connecting it all was immense under all that wet fur. From the ground to the top of the head, the creatures were perhaps 10 feet tall, and closer to 15 feet long by my reckoning. I had never seen anything like them, in life or art. They were apparently well suited to their role here, given the ease with which they pulled the carts full of heavy logs and other goods through the muddy village centre and along the roads that radiated out from it. Much of the cart traffic seemed to be destined for the road I had just trudged down, towards the northern side of town and presumably out into the wider world. Aside from these, there was a scattering of hardy folk doing business in the drizzle, and haze against a small number of stalls. These largely offered food of narrow variety, and some had steam curling up past their small wooden roofs. Each wedge of houses between the roads was fronted by purveyors of a more permanent kind. As I stepped under the overhanging of a nearby roof to gain some respite from the persistent drizzle, I assessed the buildings around the outside of the village square, trying to figure out which of them might contain one Jarl Stepasland. Without warning, a powerful shunt struck me between my shoulders and sent me stumbling back out into the rain. I barely kept my footing. "Fuck off, Salty," Don't need any more muck and shit in Motu. I had been taught how to fight every day of my life from the age of 4. Instinct drew me into a striking stance. Mercilessly enforced self-control saved my attackers. You wanna fucking fight, Salty? There were 2 of them, large and muscular, standing under the awning where I had just been. The lead thug was stepping forward now. Come on then, I'll fucking bury you right fucking here. Salty. An insult I had heard river traders from Shoba exchange with Kalan dockworkers on occasion. It was an unimaginative slur to seaborne peoples like me. Particularly stupid, because the lowland peoples of Mabal were mostly indistinguishable in appearance, language, and mannerisms from the highland Shobites. My darker skin was likely what triggered the attack, but only a few families in Mabal even had that to distinguish them from their pale highland neighbors. I had always found Salty more funny than offensive. It did not seem so funny now. Both brutes had left the awning, and were bearing down on me with the slow, heavy gait of bullies everywhere, who want to appear intimidating, but are not yet sure you will be easy pickings. I was getting pissed off. The way they had spat the word salty at me, like I was inhuman. How dare they threaten me? They did not know how quickly I could demolish them. But I could make them find out. Self-control be damned. I inhaled steadily and began to draw on the striking, giving no inch of ground to the wretches as they advanced. I could see the first trailing hints of doubt being etched into their dull features as I reached the top of my breath. The striking flowed easily, invisibly over my forearms, to entwine with my fingers. I hated those 2 fools, and I had oh so much hate to give. Illy, cow, what in the eyes of the ancestors are you idiots doing? This shout came from off to my left. The bullies, Illy and Cow presumably, stopped advancing and turned to face the newcomer. "Oh, piss off, Blend. We weren't doing nothing," cried Bully the First, senior diplomat of the pair. Blend and another taller individual were approaching us at a leisurely saunter. They wore matching tunics, with thick padded cloth over their chests, and dented vambraces on their forearms. Both also carried swords, but these remained securely within scabbards. All the hallmarks of a local town guard. "Oh yes, Cow, I can see you weren't doing nothing, all right," Blend replied, arching an eyebrow with admirable expertise. "You are both on your final warnings for fighting. Be a shame if we had to go and have a chat with the logging guild, eh?" The Salty started it," lamented Illy, most likely as a result of reflex as opposed to any dim cognitive function they may have possessed. Even the word salty lacked the sting Cow had managed earlier. Their heart just was not in it. In response to this, Blend made a show of looking back and forth between my would-be attackers and myself, and then said, "Piss off, the pair of you." That seemed to do the trick. Illy and Cow slumped off down the street I had come from, and disappeared into the grey haze of rain, muttering and mumbling like scolded little children as they did. Very carefully, I exhaled. The lines of the striking unfurled and detached themselves from the flesh of my forearms and unwound from around my fingers. Deadly force wound like the restraining rope on a catapult, delicately released back to its natural flow. Relaxing out of my aggressive stance, I straightened to face my rescuers. On behalf of the Motu Village Guard, I apologize for the behavior of those 2. Fighting is strictly forbidden in the village. Blend inclined their head. This seemed to imply I should understand that these rules also applied to me. Their taller companion remained behind them, silent but observing me intently with narrowed eyes and tightly pressed lips. "Of course," I replied, bowing slightly. "Thank you very much for your help." which I did not need. Blend nodded. I am Guard Blend, and this is Guard Anorth. Was there something in particular you were looking for in Motu? Their accent, while still distinctly Shoba-esque, had a strong, aristocratic air to it, which I found curiously nostalgic. Actually, yes. I was hoping to speak with Jarl Stepasland. Do you know where I might find them? Certainly. May I ask your name? Tora. Tora Sten. That would have been impressively stupid. Follow us, Tora Sten. The pair turned quickly and set off. I needed a moment to unstick my boots from the mire of the street. Consciously, I gave no thought whatsoever to how embarrassing it would have been to attempt to strike without being able to move my feet. We were heading directly towards the largest building in the square, possibly in the whole village, weaving in between sundry townsfolk here and there as we walked. A coat of arms with crossed swords and an embellished helmet over the top was emblazoned on the building beneath its steeply sloping A-frame roof. Well, about half of the coat of arms was emblazoned. The other half fell decidedly short of the lofty ideals of adjectives like emblazoned. Words like tattered or colourless and held together with tree sap and bits of string would have been more appropriate. Blend indicated I should wait outside while they stepped through the main door. This left me standing on the raised deck at the front of the building with Anorth, who was looking fixedly at the brick wall beside them with the expression of someone who was being forced to endure a particularly foul stench. It seemed that we Marbleites were held in distinctly mixed regard in Motu. I was spared further awkwardness when the door opened again to reveal two new figures, each heavily draped in matching grey travelling cloaks. The first person was quite short, almost as short as me, with a hard-looking face complete with scowling, hawkish eyes, and a squashed nose that put me in mind of the kind of sailors back home who picked one too many fights at the public house. The second figure was much taller and less heavy-set, with a kind face that carried a pleasant expression, despite the rain. This second person had skin even darker than my own. At least I was not the only salty in town. As the pair stepped outside, they drew their cloaks tightly about them and raised their hoods, obscuring their features from view, but not before I was able to catch a glimpse of the various blades and less identifiable paraphernalia they had strapped to their persons. Nods were exchanged between Anorth and the cloaked duo, who then shuffled off down a nearby street and were quickly out of sight. Within moments the door swung open again to reveal Blend. Jarl will see you now, Tora. They held the door open for me. I stepped into a large, sparsely furnished space, with wooden floors and stone walls, Anorth and Blend following close behind. 2 doors on the far wall led further into the building, and there was a steep, narrow stairway to an unseen upper level in one corner. A plain wooden desk littered with shelves and parchments crowded the opposite corner, and the person currently standing behind the desk entirely crowded it in turn. Welcome, friend, the voluminous individual, whom I immediately associated with both authority and regular meals, greeted me with a voice that boomed like a great drum. Thank you, friend, I replied, inclining my head respectfully. This is Sergeant Jarl Stepasland, Tora, Blend said. Greetings to you, Sergeant Stepasland, I said. Sergeant Stepasland stepped out from behind the desk. They wore what looked suspiciously like 2 of the tunics Blend and Anorth wore, sewn together at about the abdomen. The sergeant extended their right hand, palm up, and I met it at the wrist with mine, bowing slightly to complete the formal greeting. Anorth and Blend then bowed stiffly to Sergeant Stepasland and strode back out the door we had entered. I noted that the perpetually silent Anorth never dropped the sour look on their face, nor looked directly at me. I heard you ran into a couple of our more colourful characters, the sergeant said. I'm sorry about that, Tora. I'll be having a word with them myself before the day is out. They'll not bother you again. Thank you very much, Sergeant Stepasland, and please pass on my thanks again to your guards for helping me. I surely will, and you can call me Jarl if you like. Sergeant is just a fancy way of saying guard who does paperwork. Jarl laughed heartily at their own joke. Thank you again, Jarl, I replied, smiling despite myself. How can I help you then, eh? Jarl beamed and put their hands on their broad hips. Well, I need to get to Rana as soon as I can. I heard you were the person to talk to about arranging transport? Ah. Jarl's expression turned thoughtful. Aye, true enough, I would be the one to talk to, but I'm sorry to tell you that you're about 2 weeks too late for a trip to Rana, Tora. Winter is settling in, and the roads are closed. I heard that the roads were closing, I said, straining to sound diplomatic rather than desperate. But my business in Rana is really rather urgent. Will there be some essential travel between here and Rana that I might be able to join? I can pay. I was very much aware that I want to go visit the library was not exactly a compellingly urgent reason for me to travel, but I was desperate not to spend an entire season stuck in this tiny town, no closer to finding out what had happened to my beautiful Rasan. Desperate enough to part with the remainder of my life savings if it came to that. Aye, no doubt your business is urgent, Tora, Jarl explained gently, but keeping the people of Motu safe is my business, and there'll be no such travel unless strictly necessary. The roads in the mountains aren't just dangerous in the winter, they're downright deadly, especially to those that don't know them well, and that's not even to mention the chance you might get caught in a maelstrom. So that was that then. I was lost, stuck in a backwater village with no escape and no way to get any closer to my objective. I felt my plans falling away underneath me, and the light of the future fading from view. I was now standing silently in front of Jarl, with my mouth half open, and staring blankly into the middle distance. A real negotiating force of nature. Hey, now, it's not all that bad, Jarl interrupted my charismatic stupor. Motu is beautiful in the winter, truly. Do you have some place to stay? I closed my mouth and nodded glumly. Good to hear, good to hear. Jarl began to scratch at their chin and glanced at the desk behind them. Well, The sergeant wandered over to the desk, still scratching and umming and ahhing as they went. They pushed mountains of parchment around for a moment or two before proclaiming, Aha! Following which they withdrew a scroll, so yellow as to almost be brown, from the detritus of the desk and strode back around to me. How about we make a deal, eh, Tora? Jarl winked at me, shaking the scroll in their right hand. How about I guarantee to get you on the very first safe cart out of Motu that can take you to Rana? We start our resupply trips early here, because we've so much territory to cover, so the first carts leave for Rana in the second month of winter, right after the worst of the snows have gone through. How about that? And in exchange, Tora, you help me out here in Motu. With this, Jarl unfurled the stained, battered parchment in their hand to reveal a several-foot-long list of short lines of scribbled text. Each line was almost more unintelligible than the next, and perhaps half were nothing more than a large, wobbly X, inexpertly placed and overrunning into the lines above and below. Signatures. This was a list of signatures. All but 6 of them had a thin black line through the center. Right at the top of the page, faded so as to be almost invisible, was an ink copy of the coat of arms which decorated the front of the building. You want me to join the guards? I surmised. Aye, you're a quick one, Tora. You'll fit right in. Another suspiciously sincere wink accompanied their praise, but I did not have enough time to decide whether I was being mocked. Just till the next caravan leaves, course. We always need extra hands-on over winter. What do you say? In my earlier conversation with Lear, my caravan of thought had come unhitched and ground to a halt. Now it was on fire, upside down at the bottom of a ravine. A summary of my thoughts as best as I can recall. A guard? I've never been a guard. I've never been anything other than a striker. I do not want to be a guard. I want to go to Rana. What does a guard do? Guard things, I suppose. Could I guard things? No. I want to go to Rana. I cannot go to Rana. The roads are closed. I could go alone. Could I? Do I even know which way Rana is? Sure I do. Rana is south of here. Oh, very good. South. That will do it then. No doubt all one needs to know to navigate through the highest mountain range in the world in the dead of winter is a cardinal heading. Excellent thinking, Vale. Okay then, what do I do? Well, what choice do I have? Tora? Jarl was waving an enormous hand in front of my face, brow furrowed with concern. Are you okay? You were swaying. Was I? Oh, sorry. Yes. Yes, all right. Yes? Yes, I would like to join the guards. Thank you very much. Well, I'm sure we can find a place for you in the ranks, Jarl announced, that booming voice threatening to shake bricks from the walls, and a broad grin firmly emblazoned again on their countenance. We'll be needing your signature on the roll. Got to make everything all official for the noble types in charge. A knowing nod and a wink accompanied this, as though Jarl had just imparted to me a great and little-known piece of wisdom. If you would kindly make your mark just there, Jarl indicated the optimistically large blank space beneath the last signatory on the scroll. We can get you officially on the roster and look at digging out a uniform that fits. Of course, your ongoing employment will still be subject to your successful completion of the training course. The extra emphasis placed on these last two words, along with their efforts to apply a yet broader smile, hinted that this training course might be something of a point of pride for Jarl Steppersland. The sergeant was practically glowing as I signed my name on the stained parchment. The world was conspiring against me. Rana, so far away, was drifting yet further, and my hopes of finding out what happened to Raz were on a knife edge. But, even as the ink of my signature dried, a fresh resolve was forming. I would use my time in Motu to learn all that I could. I would study the striking myself. I would experiment and investigate and make the most of this winter. I would not let this setback be a failure. I would not let Rasan down. And so that was Chapter 1 of Descent by me, J.D. Evans. Thank you very much for listening. Please, if you liked the video, please do leave a like. And if you want to see more content like this, feel free to subscribe and ring the bell. All of that helps the channel immensely. If you have any comments about the book or about my reading of it, or if you want to suggest any books that I might read in the future, please comment down below. And I will see you all tomorrow.